Hello everyone, welcome again to my channel. I hope you are doing well and I hope you benefited from the previous episodes related to the preparations for the CRMF entrance exam. Today we are still talking about this again, CRMF entrance exam, and today we are going to talk about some terms, some I would say terminologies and concepts related to the didactics of language teaching, didactics of English language teaching. Okay, all right, now let's start. The first concept that you have to keep in mind that is related to didactics is what we call planning. So the first thing that we do is that we plan for a certain lesson. We prepare lesson, okay? And this is something that we do before going to classroom. This is something that we do at home, okay? And the first thing that comes to our minds when we talk about planning is what we call lesson plan. So lesson plan has component, or we can say terms. For example, when we talk about lesson plan, we have something like objectives. What do you want your student to learn? Then we can talk about something like, I would say, stages, materials you use. We can talk about timing, techniques and strategies, and we can also talk about something like mode of work. Okay, so these are examples of terms or components of lesson plan. So a lesson plan is very important because it gives you an idea and better you know what you are going to do. Okay, number two, time management. And as you can see, I have put time management after planning, after lesson plan, which means you should have the ability to manage your time. And when I say to manage your time, which means to stick to the timing you have in the plan and to try hard to finish the lesson on time, to finish your lesson, to finish all the activities you have in your plan on time. So this is what we mean by time management. Another thing, which is classroom management. Classroom management means the ability to deal with, I would say, unexpected problems or disruptive students, unexpected problems or disruptive students. So there are a lot of techniques and strategies to do that, okay? So that's what we mean by classroom management. Another thing, when we talk about classroom management, we talk about two very important things. Number one is what we call the classroom arrangements. And when I say classroom arrangement, I mean how do you arrange your class, okay? So we have different arrangements. For example, we can have the classical arrangements. We can have something like U-shape groups, for example, or we can have something like circle. So these are the arrangements you can have in your classroom. So when we talk about classical shape, for example, it is students sit in rows as we have in classrooms, for example, in rows, okay, row number 1, 2, 3. So students sit in rows. And when we talk about U-shape, students sit in a form of U, okay, in a form of U, like this. So students sit here and you walk here in the middle. You as a teacher walk here in the middle. So here students will be face to face, and this is good for discussion, etc. Groups, for example, students may be sitting in small groups, okay, 4 or 5 or even maximum 6 students in groups, okay? So students will be sitting in groups, and this is good when students are doing some activities, okay? And finally, circle. So students will be sitting in circle like this, okay? So all students will be sitting in the form of a circle. So these are the most common classroom arrangements. Classroom arrangement actually is based on two things. Number one, the number of students you have, and another thing, the activities you are doing. So these are two things that interfere in the choice of certain classroom arrangements. Number two, and this is very important to remember, is classroom management theories. For example, we can talk about the assertive theory, choice theory, we can talk about business theory. So these are theories that you have to look for and try to expand your knowledge about them, because you might be asked about these theories possibly in the oral exam. Okay, another thing is what we call the methods of teaching. So for teaching a language, we have different methods to use. For example, we can talk about the grammar translation method. We can talk about the audio-lingual method, direct method. We can talk about something like TPR, the total physical response. We can talk about something like silent way or Suggestopedia, or we can also talk about CLL, for community language learning. Nowadays, we have something like CLT, communicative language teaching. So these are different methods that you have to expand your knowledge about. And here, one thing that you have to keep in mind about all these methods is that each of these methods has drawbacks and strengths, okay? In other words, positive sides and negative sides. There is one method, appropriate one is what we call the eclecticism or the eclectic way. And eclectic way means that you have to go through all the methods. You take the positive sides or the positive points in each method and you try to use that in your class, okay? So that's what we mean by the eclecticism, eclectic way to choose, okay? Another one is ways of teaching. So here we have methods of teaching and here we have ways of teaching. In other words, here we mean how do you teach? For example, if you attend one of my classes, if you observe one of my classes, for example, teaching, I would say present perfect, for sure you will notice that I'm teaching it in a specific way. When you go and observe another teacher, you will notice that that teacher is teaching the present perfect in a different way, in another way. So the way you choose for teaching your students based on your knowledge about your student, okay? Your knowledge about your student, all right? So this is what we mean by ways of teaching. So each teacher has his or her ways of teaching. Teacher zone, this is also a very important concept to remember. When we talk about teacher zone, which means that when the teacher is in classroom, is talking, is explaining, students should be engaged, should be involved. The zone here means how many students are with you, are participating, are being involved with you while you are teaching or while you are explaining or talking, okay? So this is it. So here the idea that you have to keep in mind is that you should, as a teacher, include as many students as you can. I would say that it's to a far extent impossible to include all students, but it's your mission. It's your mission to do your best to include all students in your zone. Grading, this is also a very important concept to remember, grading. And when we say grading, here we mean two things. Number one, general, and the other one specific. Generally speaking, when we teach lessons, we don't teach lessons randomly. There are some lessons that we teach first, there are some lessons that we teach second, and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of grading. For example, you cannot teach present perfect unless if you already taught, for example, present simple, present continuous, and past simple and past continuous. You cannot go directly to present perfect, no. So there is a kind of grading. You cannot go directly and teach, for example, the conditional type 3. No, it's impossible. So you have to know, or you have to teach 0, then 1, then 2, and then number 3. So there is a kind of grading. So teaching is not a random process, okay? Number 2, specific. So grading can be related to one lesson. I take, for example, teaching present simple. You cannot go and teach the question form, then negative, and then affirmative. No. So there is a kind of grading, affirmative, negative, and then question, okay? Another thing is when it comes to practice, for example, practicing. Imagine, for instance, if you are teaching conditional 1 or 2 or 3, for example, students should do activities and exercises to practice that. Now here, I'm not going to ask students to, for example, give sentences or complete sentences, no. So you have to give them exercises to practice the form, the conjugation of the verb. Then you ask them to match, okay, the if clause with the main clause, and then to complete sentences from their own, and then to give examples, to give the whole conditional from their own. So this is, as you can see, there is a kind of grading, okay? All right, now let's go to scaffolding. And when we talk about scaffolding, there is a concept that related to scaffolding and always goes with scaffolding, which is chunks, okay? Chunks. All right. Now, chunks or pieces. So this means that you as a teacher, for teaching a certain lesson, you have to break it. You have to break it down into chunks, into pieces. Why? Very simply, to make it easier for your student to learn, for your student to understand. Okay. So this is what we mean by scaffolding, to try to help your students understand and learn. And this is by breaking the lesson or breaking the component into pieces. All right, here we talk about some techniques or strategies related to scaffolding. For example, you can either pre-teach vocabulary. For example, you pre-teach vocabulary. This is something that you have to do first before you go to the lesson. You pre-teach vocabulary, important vocabulary for the lesson. And also you can use something like visual aids. When we talk about visual aids, I talk about flashcards, pictures. You can use miming, for example, your gestures, etc. This is scaffolding. So scaffolding is a technique, strategy to help students learn. Another one, TTT and STT. Here, these ones stand for teacher talking time, student talking time. This means how long you as a teacher talk in the class and how long your student talk. Okay, so here it said that this STT or the student talking time should be higher than the TTT. However, TTT has positive side. As Krashen said, it causes what we call the deaning head. The deaning head in your student, and the deaning head can help student learn. So this is what we mean by TTT and STT, teacher talking time, student talking time. As I said, this STT should be higher, okay? All right, okay. Another one is what we call the action research. Now, action research means what you do after, your reflections, your thinking about the lesson when you finish the lesson. So this is something that when you do when we finish the lesson. When you go home, you start thinking about your lesson, about a certain class. What did you do with students? Did student learn something that you did and you shouldn't have done, something that you did and that you should have done, etc. So this is very important for your personal development. So we have different ways of action research. What I said is one example, reflection and thinking about the lesson, okay? All right, this is action research. Then the last one is assessment. So as you can see, action research and assessment is when we finish, is after the lesson, after teaching. Planning is before teaching, okay? Assessment, when we talk about assessments, we talk about something like summative assessment, and we can also talk about formative assessments, okay? Formative can be considered as continuous, something that we do regularly to check whether students learn or not. Again, when we talk about assessment, we talk about ways of assessment, and here we can talk about something like quizzes, and we can talk about tests, and we talk about exams. All right, so these are the most common ways of assessment, general ways of assessment. Quizzes should be short, something like 10 minutes or 15 minutes maximum, and it can be considered as a way of formative assessment. Okay, it's something that we can do after 1 unit or 2 units maximum. Okay, and when we talk about tests is we have something like a global test, and it is something that we do at the end of a semester. Okay, at the end of semester, and it's always for grades, for giving marks. Okay, quiz can be for marks and can be for just having an idea about your student. Exams is always at the end of the year, and it is standard, it is national, or it can also be international. For example, the CRMF exam is national. We talk about the baccalaureate exam is national. We talk about the regional exam. We talk about the TOEFL, for example, is international. So that's what we mean by exams. So these are ways of assessment, all right? Okay, so this is all for today's episode. So as you can see, the most common concepts and terms related to didactics of language teaching. If you have any question or suggestion, you are welcome. Don't hesitate to ask. A piece of advice that I'd like you to keep in mind and don't forget is that please don't focus a lot on the didactics of English language teaching and you forget about the language itself. And when we say language here, I mean grammar lessons, advanced grammar lessons, vocabulary, and also writing skill, okay, the writing skill. So for example, if a certain question is about didactics and you answer the questions with mistakes in grammar and spelling, this will impact your mark you get, okay? So language is the most important thing. I hope you benefited from this lesson. If you have any question, as I said, you're welcome. See you in another episode. Have a good time and goodbye.